Ryan, Black Friday, I decided that I was going to buy a heater, believe it or not, for my home in Florida, which sounds a bit strange,
Wait,
doesn't
you were
it?
going to buy a heater for your home in Florida?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
It does now sound strange me saying that,
Did you
but
did you also decide to buy a fog machine for your home in England? It's not, what are you doing, Colin?
I've lost all this weight. Ever since I've lost all this weight, I've got
Right.
bloody freezing. And we're there in January, and I knew that I would need a heater, and our heater on the air conditioning broke. So anyway, well, look, we haven't. This story was not about me buying a heater,
Oh,
okay,
I
and
very
and the
much
reasons for
disagree.
buying a heater.
I think I will be able to make use of this for our next. So thank you for that.
So we decided that I was going to buy. We were going to buy this heater, and I went on Amazon as I always do, and I started looking at heaters. Uh, and there's like 50 million of the bloody
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as I started to look down all these different heaters, I was actually thinking of you because I was thinking about the evaluability heuristic, and I was thinking about, all those other wonderful things. But one of the things I was thinking of was there's just so much choice.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the problems that a lot of organizations face today, I mean, it's like going into a restaurant and you're just faced with so much choice. Yeah. And I like to think I'm quite a decisive person, but it really annoys me when there's just too much choice. And
Yeah.
the
No, it can
danger is,
be
is that
overwhelming.
you feel that you're going to make the wrong choice, don't you? You know, and even saying the wrong choice implies things like, well, what is the right choice? Because
Right.
so, so is the right choice the heater that has got the most reviews? Is that the right choice? Is the right choice the best heater? I don't know, per kilowatt or whatever else it is. So anyway, today we're going to talk about choice and why choice can be a blessing and why choice can be a curse as
Yeah.
well, and what to do
Yeah.
about it.
So this is a whole field of research in academic marketing and a few other academic disciplines. My thesis advisor, the guy that I worked under to get my PhD, he published a lot of research in this area. He and I have one paper together on it.
All right.
But yeah, so it is an active area, and it comes down to this phenomenon that you noticed, which is that sometimes, like, if you ask anybody, do you want more options or fewer options? We're almost always going to say we want more options.
Sure.
And yet your experience of actually getting what you want in terms of
Yeah.
more options to choose from, it's surprising how easily overwhelmed we are.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk you through two of the major theories that have been explored to understand this. And then we're going to wrap up towards the end with some discussion about what you can do about it. Because this is kind of a basic human phenomenon, and
Right.
it's been called the paradox of choice. Before, Barry Schwartz has a book with that title, because it does describe this conflict. Like, people say they want more choice, but if you give them more choice, sometimes that results in some negative outcomes, including people feeling less satisfied with the choices that they make, people deciding not to choose at all, kind of foregoing that choice. So let's talk about why that happens.
Sounds good.
So,
Good.
sorry, I don't know if this is picking this up. My office at Emory is close to the Emory Hospital, and so you get to hear sirens going by occasionally from my office
I
window.
thought that this was your prison cell, and
And or it's the police finally coming to get me after all this time. No, somebody's life was being saved, but thanks for making a joke out of that, Colin. Um, no, we have a fantastic hospital here, and I'm very proud of the work that they do. Not that I do anything to support it directly, but yeah, that is one of the side effects. All right, so let me tell you about the most famous experiment that documented this choice overload phenomenon. So it's very clever. It was run in a grocery store in California.
Right.
And it was a grocery store that was famous for having large assortments. So, it wouldn't, you go to buy mustard and it wouldn't be just a few mustards. It would be just like a wall of mustards, just all
Yeah.
these different. So they set up a sampling table with jams. So there's this brand of jams that carried a lot of different flavors. And every hour they would rotate it. So for 1 hour, there would be 6 jams on the table. And you could stop and they'd give you some crackers and a knife and you could like taste test anything you wanted to. And then every hour they would switch out and it would go from 6 to 24 different flavors of jam.
Right.
And everybody who stopped got a coupon. So they could then track whether you actually bought the jam later or not. So there were 2 key variables that they looked at. One was how likely were people to stop. So they had somebody standing on the edge there with a clipboard, and everybody that would enter the aisle, they would get a tick mark. And then everybody who would stop, they would get a separate tick mark. So they were able to see of the percentage of people who walked by, how many actually stopped. And when it was 24 jams, way more people stopped. It was like 60% of the people stopped relative to like 40% or something like that.
Right.
It was more attractive. People were drawn to it more. When they tracked the coupons, though, I apologize, I might be getting some of these numbers a little off, but they're in the right general direction.
Sure. Are you giving us a choice of numbers now?
Pardon?
You're giving us a choice of numbers to choose from, is that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm giving you the choice to believe my faulty memory or not. I should have pulled up this study before I started getting this deep in the weeds. Something like a third of the people who got the coupon when there was 6 jams on the table actually ended up buying the jams. But it was only like 3% who bought when there were 24 jams on the table.
Right. Okay.
So there's a stark difference where people were much more attracted to it when there was lots of choice. But once when they got into it and they actually had to decide amongst them all.
It was too many.
It was too many, and they didn't. So that study, the authors claimed and provided some additional evidence that the driver of that was primarily demotivation. So you get into this, you see that there's 24 of these different jams. Like, how do you even start? Like, how do you choose between 24 different flavors of jam?
Yeah.
Like, even reading through that list, I would find exhausting.
Sure.
And so people just say, forget it. Like, I don't care about jam that much. And so it reduces their motivation.
And it's like that in general, isn't it? I mean, the trouble is you go into a supermarket. I was thinking about, there's a wine store or a alcohol store called Total Wine, where we are in Florida. And I went in there the other day to buy some beer, and the bloody craft beer selection. It was just, I like a craft beer, but trying to pick out the right craft beer and everything else was just, I was in there for about 4 hours, it felt like.
Yeah, you need to have had several beers before you can handle choosing beers.
Yes.
It's just, no, there's lots of stuff like this where once it was explained to people, or once people read that paper, they were like, like I can see that. I've been in those situations.
Sure.
So
go on. So the question I was going to ask you, so in that case of the jam, is there an optimal number?
Good. It's a good question. The short answer is no. Only because it depends on too many things. Right. So is there an optimal number for jams when displayed on a table? Probably.
But
is there an optimal
sort of context specific?
Yes. If we could figure out what that optimal number was for the jams in that setting, it might be different if we're looking at jams than on display on the store shelf.
Sure.
Relative to being on the display table. And then if you want to apply that number to your business selling, telephone systems to businesses, that's completely. So it depends on, in general, we can talk about it. It depends on the complexity of the information. So if it's more complex information, that's going to be a smaller number before people get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It depends on, I remember hearing a radio report once talking about medical errors. Sometimes doctors and hospital systems make mistakes, and that this advocate was saying, look, it's your responsibility. If you're going to get surgery, or if a loved one is going to get surgery, you need to go in and you need to figure out which is the best hospital to get that. And I remember thinking, there's no possible way. Like, I would be so overwhelmed by that choice. Like,
Sure.
it's such an emotionally fraught decision. It's so high pressure. The information, like, I would be overwhelmed and demotivated if I had three hospitals to choose from. Like, it
Sure.
would be too much for me personally.
Sure. Sure.
And so I think that there are settings like that. There are other things where if you're like a hobbyist and you're like, if I had to choose between, different miter saws that I wanted to buy, oh yeah, give me
Sure.
20. Like
Yes.
I could
Yes.
look through that
But I
information all day
but
long.
as I was thinking about this prior to us jumping on the to record this, I mean, clearly the key thing you should do is just bloody test it. So,
Yeah.
and go back into our favourite subject of segmentation, because again,
Yes.
it would, if you're doing it to somebody who's buying a saw that is a experienced person like your good
Exactly.
self, a lot of variation may be, or I would imagine that the number is actually going to be increased if you've, i.e., the choices that you gave them. If you gave it to somebody that's naive and only just getting into it, then more directional approach would probably be, would be more beneficial. But the key issue is test that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Recognize that more choice can be bad, but that it'll differ in terms of how much is too much. It'll differ by segment,
Yeah,
in part based on expertise, in part based on other things. But yeah, if you want to apply these particular findings, or honestly any findings that we talk about, the best thing to do is to test it in your
yeah,
situation.
yeah,
Absolutely.
totally, totally.
So that's one theory. One theory is that too many options demotivates us. It just stops us from
Sure.
caring about this. We decide we want to do other things.
And would you put in, look, so can I jump in with
Yeah,
something
yeah,
else?
yeah.
Because again, I was thinking about it. The I was thinking about the word anxious. It makes you get anxious that you're making the right choice. So I'm just about to buy a new television. Okay. Um, and I'm now looking into, as I normally do, doing my research, and
Yep.
and I've even got down into going, well, what's the difference with the product numbers? And the first three letters are for this, and the second two letters are for that,
So
and
you're
so,
comparing the serial numbers on
well,
or
not
the
serial
model
numbers, but
numbers.
the product and model numbers. Yeah,
Yeah,
and there are small differences between the different models, and they could vary in like $100 difference. But you just then start going, for goodness sake, you're just now diving down into the weeds on this stuff. Just
excellent.
but but the when I started to examine, well, why am I doing that? It's going because actually I don't want to make the wrong decision, so I'm starting to feel anxious, and I don't want to be sitting there in 6 months' time going, oh bloody hell, I wish I'd spent an additional $100 and got the
So that is
EQ
the
edition.
second explanation. You did it.
Ta-da!
You did it. You totally stole my thunder. So thanks for that, Colin.
Sorry about that.
No, that's a great example, right? So the first one is that it's demotivational, or can be.
Right.
Right? We're overwhelmed, and there's the second one is that larger sets change our expectations, and therefore kind of our reference points for what would be acceptable, right?
Right.
So if I gave you two TVs to choose from,
Yeah.
and that was the universe of your options,
Yes.
you would pick one of those TVs and you would probably be pretty satisfied
Yes.
with it.
Yes.
But that's not the way shopping works anymore, right? You
Sure.
don't go to a store for some stuff, for big ticket items. You don't go to a store and say, well, what are the 20 TVs that they've got on display here? That one is the best one for me.
Sure.
Instead, your selection set, for all the good that the internet does us, and it does us a lot of good, um, we now have essentially infinite or nearly infinite consideration sets for a lot of things. And
Yes.
so it's not just what's on display in this store, it's also at other stores, and it's also at online stores, and it may be from stores in completely different, you know, countries, for some of the stuff that we buy. And now all of that's available. And what that does is it shifts what we find acceptable. If it's just a set of three TVs in front of you, your job is to pick the best of those three, and then you're pretty satisfied with it. But
It,
now, if the set is very large, you're expecting that there might be a better TV out there if you just keep looking, or you're nervous about, exactly what you were saying, buying it and then finding out the next day that there was actually a better option out there.
But it shifts. The other thing I think for me, mate, is it shifts responsibility. So if I'm offered two,
Yeah.
it feels like that's not my decision, because there are only two things that you could buy. So it was a choice of this one or that one. Whereas if there are 100 things that I can buy, then actually that's my decision, because I didn't understand or didn't go for that type of variable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's still, in both cases it's your decision, but in the second one, there's like an additional decision that needs to be made, which is the construction of the consideration set. So you're not just in the choosing part; you now also have a responsibility for the research part and for the
Yes.
comparison part and for the
Yes.
figuring out what matters. There are a couple of examples that I use for this that tend to resonate with people. When I was growing up in the States, we had like three primary TV channels
Yeah.
to choose from in most markets. And that's, so you wanted to sit down in the evening to watch a show, you kind of had three or four options, and that's what
Sure.
you did. And so you picked the best one that was available
Sure.
there. And then along came basic cable, and now instead of three channels, you've got, several dozen channels. And that
Sure.
actually made it harder. You spent a lot more time not watching
Sure.
TV, but instead flipping through the menu.
Yeah.
And now we've got, Netflix and other streaming services where it has happened to me where I have sat down in front of Netflix and spent 45 minutes scrolling
Trying to
through
work. Yeah. Yeah.
options
Yeah.
only to turn off the TV and walk
Yeah.
away without having watched anything.
Yeah.
And that's this phenomenon where I've seen all the options. Like if you gave me one screen of Netflix options,
Sure.
I would pick something and I would watch it.
Yes.
But now I
Yeah.
know there might be something better on the next screen. I should
Yeah.
check there. And there might be something better on the next screen.
Yeah. And the interesting bit for me with that is, because I've said this to Lorraine, my wife, if I'm starting to invest in watching a series, and there are 10 1-hour episodes, that's
Mhm.
suddenly 10 hours of my life.
Yeah.
And you get to episode 3 and you think, I'm not going to spend another 7 hours of my life watching this. It's just not worth it. So I think it goes back to, I think to a certain extent, the choice is, maybe it's not necessarily the responsibility. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say it's also about, well, what are you valuing at that point? Yeah, because I think the shows have increased the quality of the shows, but it's what are you valuing? Are you valuing your time? So I could argue that me spending all the time investigating and doing the research on the TV is not worth it. In fact, I know friends who would
Sure.
walk into a store and just go, yeah, I'll have a 5-minute chat with a salesperson, and they'll go, I'll have that one. And is their choice any better than the choice I've made? Probably not, if I'm honest.
Yeah. So this is part of that same phenomenon where when you have more choices, they tend to vary on more dimensions. Right?
Yes.
So as you add more TVs, like if you added more TVs, but the only difference with the new TVs was the screen size was just slightly bigger or smaller,
Yes.
that still wouldn't be an overwhelming choice, right? You'd
Yeah.
realize at some point, like, this is enough variation on the screen size, I'm good. But because as we add more options, it usually we're like, oh well, now this one has more HDMI ports. I didn't even realize that was something that varied. Maybe I should start
Yeah.
caring about that. And then now here's this new resolution like scale that I wasn't aware of that's only on
And
some
the,
of these, and
and the
that
other
makes it
thing
more
I
complex.
yeah, and the other one that I was just about to go into was brand,
Yeah.
and what does it say about you? Yeah, because I remember when we were talking about TVs, I remember buying a Samsung TV 10 years ago, just when Samsung were getting into televisions. And I remember all my mates taking the mickey out of me in other words, ribbing me about buying this Samsung, because at the time it wasn't seen as a good television.
Mm.
It actually was. But the point being, it's a brand thing. So part of that choice is, well, what are other people going to say about you if you're making this choice?
Yeah, and again, I would suggest that concern is more of a concern when we have more options. If there
Yes,
are 3 TVs on the market, there's
yes,
going to be less social stigma associated with
yes,
choosing one brand
yeah.
but if
Because
there's a
that's a
hundred,
way thinking about it, and this is a blinding flash of the bloody obvious. When there is more choice, branding becomes more important.
yeah, it can. So when we talk about like what can be done around this, brand cuts both ways a little bit, but I agree with you. In general, brand is one way that people simplify the choice for themselves and
Yeah,
choose to
because if I've
focus.
got a choice of two things,
Yeah,
I won't say brand's unimportant, but if I've
right.
got the choice of two things, the chances of the brand being the most important is not necessarily the key, unless
Right, because it's going to be easier for you to reconcile all the non-brand information. You'll be able to handle
yeah,
that. But when it's
yeah,
100 choices, you have to simplify that in some way. And
yeah,
brand is a very easy way for people to do
yeah,
that.
yeah.
The other
Interesting.
example I like to use for this reference point story, the fact that people tend to have higher expectations when they have when that comes from larger choice sets, is if you've ever met a couple who are both from the same small town, where they were convinced that they were soulmates for each other, right? Like
Right,
if your dating pool is like 3 or 4 people who are kind of close to your own age, then there's a decent chance that you will settle on one of them, and empirically,
sure,
you may end up pretty happy in that. When people move to very large cities when they're single, it's very common for them to date endlessly and kind of never settle down. And part of that is you're kind of always looking over your date's shoulder at the
uh,
bar to see all
sure,
the other options that are out there. Like you have a higher set of expectations. Well, if I'm in this huge city with all these other single people,
sure,
there's got to be my ideal match
sure.
out there somewhere. And so people
Yeah,
set kind of different expectations around them, and it's not always to their benefit, honestly.
yeah. No, I get surprised sometimes as I've been married for nearly 40 years. And I'm surprised at that because I've said to Lorraine, do you think that you would be the only person that I would ever love? Yeah. I mean, if you just
Yeah,
took
I'm
the
surprised your
numbers,
marriage has lasted past that question too. Do you want to try rephrasing that?
but well, if you just think about it from a numbers perspective,
Yeah.
so I love Lorraine intensely. Okay. But is she the only woman that I would have ever married in the whole of the world? Okay. Now, the romance that I don't have a romantic bone in my body, so I won't even say the romance in me because I haven't got one. But the romance in Lorraine would say, no, we were meant for each other and
Right.
everything else. And I'm going, well, no, we're not actually. If you look statistically,
You're
that can't be the case, can it?
you're killing the idea of soulmates with cold hard statistics, Colin. And this is brutal.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would bet that statistically you are more likely to find your soulmate out of a small dating pool than out of a large dating pool
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting,
for that
isn't it?
reason. So,
Yeah.
and it's the same Netflix phenomenon. Like it's harder to commit if you feel like, there might be
So when
something
you
there.
have this, when you have that, do you have that when you're dating now? Do you have one of those surprise me buttons?
When I'm dating now, I am not dating now, and it would surprise everyone if I was,
Because on
especially my
Netflix,
wife.
on Netflix to overcome this choice, and we I think we had one of your colleagues
I
on the
mean,
show, didn't we?
so I don't know that there are surprise me options, although that would be interesting.
It would be,
Um,
wouldn't it?
there are services though and we can start to transition now into what can you do about this
Sure.
as a firm. I mean, as far as I know, I think there are dating apps where they do a lot of the screening for you. So the
Right.
idea is we've got these tens of thousands of
Yeah.
people out there, but
Yeah. They're obviously
based
doing that, I
on
guess.
whatever, our
Yeah.
algorithm says these are the 10 that it would be most interesting to you.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
that
By definition, they've got to be doing that. They've got to be
exactly.
filtering it down.
Yeah.
It's not just
And
going to
so
be random,
that's the
is it?
way of saying we're going to take
Yeah.
this large set and turn it into a small set. And so that's one piece of advice that you can give people. One of the ways to get the benefits of both giving people lots of choice and then also managing that choice set for them is to curate it for them. So it's like,
Yeah.
we got a million options, but let's start here. Like these are the
Sure.
10 that we think would be most interesting to you based off of it. And
Yeah.
to the extent that people trust your judgment, trust your algorithm, uh, they can, act as if they're getting all the benefits of all the choice, but not having to suffer through the consequences of actually being overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a bit of advice I would give people in this area is one is the resist the temptation to come up with more and more choices,
Yeah,
because the danger is internally you look at your product or service and you think, oh well, maybe there's a segment of the market that
right.
would like it this way, and maybe there's a segment of the market that would like it that way, and therefore before you know it, you got 27 different televisions, based on a slight variation of it. The other part then for me goes back to the testing of it,
Yeah,
which is, I think that's absolutely key, making sure that you're testing what's with those different segments and looking at the numbers that are beyond that. Yeah, I mean, I was reminded of this the other night. We were out for a meal and we went to a restaurant, and we were at one of these restaurants that have got like 7 pages of food
yeah,
that you can buy.
yeah.
And Gordon Ramsay, I don't know if you've ever listened to
Mhm.
watch Gordon Ramsay. He rightly so says you should give people like 5 choices of a main course. And that's it. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily 5, but for me, it's like that feels like a decent number. And sometimes you feel a little constrained with only 5 choices, but it does take there is a good thing about not having so much choice.
Yes,
And there's a good
absolutely.
thing there about the expert has narrowed it down to the 5. And to a certain extent, thinking about it, I mean, that's got to be what stores do, isn't it? So again, I'm thinking of my television. They can't fit every single bloody product in the store, and they're going to want to choose some of the best TVs to have. And the other thing it made me think about,
Well,
um,
best as defined by covering the largest portions of the market, usually.
the largest, correct, and therefore suiting the largest portions of the market. The other thing that made me think though the other day was how many times when you go to search for a product on Amazon, how many times do you actually go to the second and third pages? I
Right,
never do.
right.
I never ever go to the second and third pages. I
Yeah.
always just pick out whatever it is on that first page.
So that's an important lesson there, right? So a lot of people are attracted to Amazon because they know they'll have a huge selection. And yet most people don't take advantage of that huge selection
Yeah,
because it's overwhelming. And
yeah,
so we're relying on Amazon to kind of bubble up the most what they
yeah,
think will be the most attractive options to us, or that we assume that they will. They break it up by pages so that you've got a kind of a discrete set, and then you can choose to move on to the next one.
yeah,
So they do some things that help us mitigate it. One big thing that they do is they allow you to sort the set in a
yeah,
number of different ways that meet your
yeah,
needs, or you can screen and filter. Those are
yeah,
all ways of making it easier on customers to evaluate option
yeah,
sets.
yeah,
Even knowing what dimensions there are or that matter, which is some of what this filtering options does. Like I've got different
yes,
brands here that I can choose from. Oh, I've got different sizes of
yes,
the TV. Oh, I've got different like numbers of HDMI ports that I can
yes,
sort by. All of those kind of tell me as a naive consumer what might be important for me and help me kind of
yes,
figure out what I want before I really dig into the weeds and start looking at all of those
yeah,
things. Make it
yeah,
easier for customers.
yeah. No, absolutely. No, good. Good. So we hope that's been of use, and we are very pleased that you've chosen the intuitive
Out of
customer.
all
How
of the
about that?
podcasts out there,
All do you like the way that I did that?
yeah, no, that was
Sort of,
good. That was good.
it was,
We'll
wasn't
encourage our customers to imagine we're the only podcast out there,
it?
thereby not overwhelming you with choice, and
Yeah.
just listen to us.
But genuinely, thank you very much for listening this week. If you could do us one favor, that would be to do a review. That would really help us. And that helps us go up in the algorithms, and hopefully we get on the front pages of which podcasts to choose. So thanks very much, everyone, for listening. And we look forward to talking to you next week on the show. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.